Good morning. Welcome to Wake Up with Ashland. My name is Eric Brooks. I'm the curator here at Ashland, and it's great to be with you this morning for another installment of Wake Up with Ashland. I want to take a minute to thank Dupree Mutual Funds for making this series possible. It's been a lot of fun being able to be with you for the last 4 or 5 months, and we hope to be able to continue to do that well into the future. Good morning, Gaynell Warren. Thank you for watching. Today, we're going to do something kind of neat. With 11 days to go before the presidential election, I thought this would be a good time to look at Henry Clay's runs for the White House and talk about presidential campaigning in his era. We happen to have a very, very fine, very expansive collection of campaign memorabilia and ephemera. And so we're going to look at a lot of that today and talk about some things. And I think one of the things you're going to see is that what happens today started in Henry Clay's era, and he's a big part of creating a lot of the things that we see in today's campaigns. So I hope you enjoy it. Look forward to your questions. Good morning, Linda. Good morning, Mike McDonald, one of our volunteers. Good morning, Rebecca Smith. Thank you all for watching. So we're going to start, first of all, before we get to the first piece, which is behind me, I think it's important that we ask a question that is often asked here at Ashland and that has sort of a complex answer. Exactly how many times did Henry Clay run for the presidency? Good morning, Byron. Good morning, Steve Sanders and Marty Moore. Thank you for watching. And the answer to that often varies. Some say 3, some say 5 times. What is the difference? Well, Clay was a candidate in 3 general elections, that is, 3 November elections. So a final candidate for the presidency, nominated candidate of his party. 2 other times, he sought the nomination. So 1824, 1833, or 1824, 1832, and 1844, he was nominated by his party. He was a general election candidate. In 1840 and again in 1848, he sought the nomination but was not nominated in the spring, and so therefore did not participate in the general election in the fall. So Clay was involved in most elections between 1824 and 48, so a 24-year period. He's involved in almost every election that happens. It is ironic that the only elections in which he was not a general candidate for which he sought the nomination are the 2 that the Whigs won. Those elections ended up in the same way. The Whig candidates became president, and their greatest accomplishment thereafter was dying in office. So it didn't work out real well. Good morning, Wood. Good morning, Sue. Thank you for watching. Nice to see you this morning. So anyway, there were 2 Whig candidates. Henry Clay was a Whig. The two-party system as we know it today sort of originated around 2 people. Andrew Jackson, Democrat, Henry Clay, Whig. Prior to that, there were parties, but they weren't very strong and weren't very differentiated. If you look at 1824, all 4 candidates list themselves more or less as the same party. So it took time for those parties to coalesce. And it's really Henry Clay and Andrew Jackson that become the ideological centers of the 2 parties. The Republican Party would emerge from one of the fragments of the Whig Party when it broke up. So the 2-party system as it now exists owes a lot to Henry Clay and Andrew Jackson. So I'm going to turn around now. This is one of the more impressive items in our campaign collection. This is a campaign flag. You can see here it's got Henry Clay, and Frelinghuysen was his running mate. It's a very long name. He was a gentleman from New Jersey. His family is still in politics. I think one of his descendants just recently retired from either the House or the Senate. There have been Frelinghuysen's in government from before Theodore, who was Henry Clay's running mate, until the present. But they're listed there. You can see Henry Clay in the canton. And people would buy these and hang them on their barn or their porch or on a flagpole, bring them to parades and rallies. And these things were widely available. You could go to your local mercantile and they would have a bolt of these, and you could ask for one or more than one if you wanted them, and they would roll them off the bolt, cut it off, and sell it to you. So 1844, which is when this was made, is the first campaign, one of the first campaigns for which we see widespread memorabilia. Stuff is everywhere. And that's not the case as much earlier on. We'll show some things from a couple of the earlier campaigns, but you don't see much memorabilia a lot before this. Okay, we're going to move this way. We're going to do some walking and talking, and then we'll end up upstairs where we'll see the bulk of the collection. But there are some items that I thought were really neat that I just didn't feel I could really move. Try to move so I'm not in the light. So this is a painting in our collection, and you might not recognize that as Henry Clay, but that is who that is. Henry Clay gained a nickname, particularly in 1844, that was very popular, the Mill Boy, or the Mill Boy of the Slashes. And that was a reference to an idea that he had to ride a great distance with the grain to the mill, good morning Virginia, to have that grain ground into flour. And what it's trying to communicate is the idea that Clay grew up to some degree in hardship and poverty, had to deal with loss, and so made his own way, became his own success. We have this engraving here, which is not really a campaign item, but it came around the same time, that shows the birthplace of Henry Clay. That's a pretty substantial house. Those are pretty substantial outbuildings. You can see there are lots of people. And we know from historical sources that Henry Clay was born on a piece of his mother's father's farm, about 250 acres. His mother and father enslaved a number of people, so they were clearly people of means. We now know from archaeology that there was a mill right over here beside the house, so he wasn't writing anywhere. So that just simply doesn't hold water. So then the question is, what is the purpose of this? What is this? This is campaign propaganda. If you think propaganda is a new thing, it's not. This piece was designed to tell a story and convince voters, good morning Cindy and David, of certain things about Henry Clay and about his background, appeal to the common man, if you will. Good morning, Christy. Good to see we have several descendants watching today. So that's the idea. The Mill Boy of the Slashes was a very popular image, reproduced in a variety of ways and referenced in a variety of ways. We actually have a campaign banner that was made into a quilt that was used by a Henry Clay group, a Whig group called the LaGrange Mill Boys out of LaGrange, Tennessee. So that name was used by supporters of Clay, but obviously is campaign propaganda. And I'm going to step here into the drawing room, and there are two pieces I want to look at here. One of them is right there. Often candidates in elections want to associate themselves with other important figures. In this case, and I'll try again to step out of the reflection. No matter what I do, I get something. Henry Clay is associating himself with the greatest figure of all in that time, George Washington. So this engraving was meant to imply that Henry Clay was in the school of Washington, a follower of Washington, that if you voted for Clay in some way, you were voting for the ideals of George Washington. Over here, this piece of music is a piece of Henry Clay campaign music. It's called Henry Clay's Grand March, Waltz, and Quickstep. There were a bunch of these that were composed for the 1844 campaign. These were used at campaign events, balls and things during the period. This is one of about 8 or 10 that we have in the collection. It's one of the best. It has a very colorful, very attractive cover. You can see there's Henry Clay at the center of it. So this was a popular way to get out the message about one's candidate. And I'll show you upstairs another way, that they did this with music that shows how supporters could have music available at all times. Now we're going to go to the library. My light is not on. Let's see if I can turn my light on here. There we go. Should have checked that. Many of you may wonder about voting and how that worked. Good morning, Diana, another of our volunteers. This is what's called a poll book. This is a record of all the votes cast in a specific precinct from 1844. This is actually from the Long Branch precinct in DeWitt County, Illinois. Good morning, Deborah. Got any Illinois people out there? This is from your state. And it shows all of the people who voted. These are voters in that precinct listed. And next to them is a hash mark. These hash marks show who they voted for. You got James K. Polk, who ran against Henry Clay, and his running mate George Dallas, Henry Clay, Theodore Frelinghuysen. If you look at the top, we got a whole series of names written diagonally. These are electors. These people would vote in the Electoral College if their candidate won the state. Notice one of the ones for Henry Clay is Abraham Lincoln. So he would have voted in the Electoral College for Henry Clay. So had Clay won this state. Unfortunately, not only did he not win the Long Branch precinct, he lost 39-16, but he also lost the state. So Lincoln never got to cast his vote in the Electoral College, something I'm sure he deeply regretted because he campaigned and voted for Clay more than once. In 1832, he cast his first vote for the presidency for Henry Clay. And in 1844, he not only voted for Clay, he campaigned for him and was an elector for him. We actually have 2 poll books in the collection. The other one is from Wayne County, Kentucky, and that one is a county that Clay won. So we have both sides of the coin. But this one is out and available and easy to see and shows some important things. We're going to go back out in the hallway now. We have a series of engravings related to the 1844 campaign. This is Theodore Frelinghuysen, Henry Clay's running mate. These were all done by Nathaniel Currier, who became famous with his partner, James Merritt Ives. Later on, I'm sure you're all familiar with Currier and Ives and their holiday scenes and things. Well, this is something they did, Nathaniel did. Good morning, Deborah. Very early in the going. He started this in 1844, and he would do it for every presidential election until very late in the 19th century. And he would do individual ones. Here's Henry Clay. There's another Henry Clay up there. He would also do these. This is called the Grand National Banner. This is actually the Democratic banner, and you'll see there, that's James K. Polk. That is his running mate, George Dallas. And yes, if you're wondering, he is thought to be the person for whom Dallas, Texas is named. So they were running mates, and their big idea was the annexation of Texas to acquire that territory and perhaps to further incite war with Mexico in order to expand the country. And James K. Polk was often referred to as Little Hickory because he was a follower and sort of the heir apparent of Andrew Jackson, Old Hickory. So there they are. Incidentally, for those of you who are campaign collectors, a campaign item like this that features 2 candidates is referred to as a juget. This is a juget. Good morning, Julie. Another descendant. Thanks for showing. Nice to see you. There's a close-up of George Dallas, for those of you interested in that sort of thing. We're going to head on upstairs now. Sneak peek. There's our collection. We'll look at that in a minute. But I want to look at this item first. This tells an important story. So this is a quilt. This is interesting in several ways, but mainly this tells an important part of the Whig story. Henry Clay was a Whig, and obviously women didn't have the right to vote in Clay's time. It was said that had they the right to vote, he would have won election easily and often. But they didn't. Although, it is important to note that the Whig Party, Clay's party, worked hard to involve women and allow women to participate in the political process. They could create campaign memorabilia, they could espouse ideas, campaign for candidates, etc. And so, that's very, very important. That's something the Democrats didn't do, which is why it was said that had women the right to vote, Clay would have won election easily and often. This quilt was made probably after the election to commemorate it. And you'll see all the stars. Those stars each have at their center, I'm just going to get down here and show this a little better, a portrait of Henry Clay. Those come from campaign ribbons, which I'm going to show you in just a minute. And this is a way to preserve this campaign for future use. So this is actually a remnant. This is what was left after we had 2 quilts. with some good parts and some bad. We put the good parts together to preserve them. So this preserves the idea with the best possible pieces. Okay, move on upstairs now. So here is the Grand National Wig banner, and there's Henry Clay and Theodore Frelinghuysen. The nation's choice for president and vice president. Onward. So, yes, we do have some things for 1832. We have a clock downstairs. That may have been made for the 1832 campaign. I have another item I'm going to show here in just a minute that is for 1832. That's really, really interesting. But this is from 1844. Again, this is Currier, Nathaniel Currier, and it's the first of its kind. There were many firsts for Henry Clay. He was the first candidate nominated by his party for the presidency. That happened in 1832. The first message transmitted electrically between two locations, two cities, was transmitted on May 2nd, 1844 from Baltimore to Washington, D.C. by Samuel F.B. Morse on his new telegraph. And that message said that Henry Clay had received the Whig nomination for president. So we start there, and now you see where we are with Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, gazillions of campaign ads, all starting from that single little seed. So there are just lots of firsts that Henry Clay is a part of as a candidate. Now I'm going to show you some things from our collection. This will give you an idea of the way campaigning was done and the kinds of things that were used to campaign. So we're going to start here. These are called metallettes. Metallettes are small metal tokens. Good morning, Shirley. Good morning, Mary. These could be worn on a lapel. You'll see the hole. The hole was designed to have a thread or a ribbon put through it. You wear it on your lapel to show your support. This one shows Henry Clay in American industry. That was something he was a big supporter of. And it talks about him being inaugurated. This was kind of wishful thinking. This one shows, again, American economy. That was his big thing. The American system was his big campaign idea. So you can see there some things related to that. This is one of my favorites. This is really a beautiful metalette from our collection. This is a bigger one with a ship. Again, commerce, the champion of protective tariffs. He was a big advocate of tariffs. This one has a picture of Henry Clay on the back. It's rather an unfortunate, somewhat unflattering image. I guess not everybody was as good as all artists on Henry Clay. It's an interesting metalette. This one is called a shell. You can see that unlike the others, it's sort of two-part, and it's the image is set in. That's a fancier version. And again, Henry Clay. This one is actually a button. You could buy buttons like this on a card, a whole set, to do your coat or your waistcoat or whatever. So you could have a complete campaign coat with buttons. And you see on the back, the loop is now missing, but this is a campaign button. And I have actually seen, I had a collector contact me once who had a complete card of these buttons, which is the only time I've ever seen one, on the original card as it was sold in the store. Julie asks about sound amplification, and this is an interesting question because there are accounts of Clay speaking literally to thousands of people, but I don't know of any sound amplification. I mean, about the best they could have done would have been a megaphone. So I don't know how Clay accomplished that. That's always been a question to me, how he managed to be heard by all those people, because no, there was no sound amplification until much later in the 19th century or maybe early 20th century. This is an interesting piece. This is an inaugural medal. And from the time of George Washington all the way up, when a president is elected, for their inauguration, a medal is cast. And these are usually given to friends, political colleagues, etc. This one is for John Quincy Adams. And this goes to the 1824 campaign. The 1824 campaign was Clay's first. And it's one that you'll often hear about today because of what happened. So there were 4 candidates in this campaign: Henry Clay, Andrew Jackson, John Quincy Adams, and William Crawford. The election was held, and no one received more than 50% of the votes in the Electoral College. Jackson received the most popular votes and the most votes in the Electoral College, but did not receive the necessary more than 50% to be elected president. The Constitution states in the 12th Amendment that when that occurs, the election is thence to be decided by the House of Representatives. Well, Henry Clay was Speaker of the House. Unfortunately, he finished 4th in the Electoral College and more or less in a tie with William Crawford for the popular vote. So, he didn't get to participate. He wasn't a candidate for the House, but he was Speaker. So, that gave him considerable power in terms of selecting the next president. So, the election goes to the House. And there are several things that are going on. First of all, Henry Clay had always opposed Andrew Jackson because he was a military officer, a general, and he was afraid that Jackson could co-opt the military to become a dictator. So he wasn't at all excited about voting for Jackson. Further, they disagreed on just about everything. They were pretty much political opposites. William Crawford was in a bad position. He had suffered a stroke and was virtually comatose, a fact that his people hid very carefully in the late days of the campaign to try to get him votes. Unfortunately, Clay knew that, so he couldn't really vote for a guy who was not likely to survive to be president. He did survive, but they didn't know that he would. So that left John Quincy Adams. Adams and Clay knew each other well, had worked together to negotiate the Treaty of Ghent, weren't really exactly the same politically. They had some similar ideas, but they respected each other a great deal, even if they were very different people. So Clay advocated for John Quincy Adams and sought to see him elected in the House. And the voting came down. And at the end, John Quincy Adams had 12 votes, Andrew Jackson had 7, and William Crawford had 4. So 12 was exactly 50%. So John Quincy Adams needed one more to be elected. The last state remaining, and remember that in the House, it's not straight every member of the House gets a vote. It's every state delegation gets a vote. So all the state delegations had voted except New York. New York had 4 votes for Adams, and the rest were split. The other half of the votes were split between the other 2 candidates, which means that neither candidate, no candidate, had enough to win the state of New York. That left one delegate, one representative from New York who hadn't voted. His name was Stephen Van Rensselaer. He was an extremely wealthy man, largest landowner in New York. He had originally intended to vote for Jackson. Henry Clay and Daniel Webster spoke to him and gave him some reason to vote for John Quincy Adams, and so he wasn't sure what to do. He entered the House, he sat down at his desk, and looked down and saw on the floor a piece of paper. And he picked it up, he realized it was a ballot for John Quincy Adams. And he decided that was a divine sign that he should vote for John Quincy Adams. And that's how John Quincy Adams became president. It's an often cited election. It's one of the cases where the winner of the popular vote did not become president. And you'll hear a lot about it today. Clay was accused of entering into a corrupt bargain with John Quincy Adams because he was named Secretary of State, which was seen as a stepping stone to the presidency. I've never thought that there was any particular bargain. There wasn't a need for one. Clay wasn't going to do anything else. So I don't think that actually happened. Good morning, Virginia. This is kind of an interesting campaign item. This is a campaign razor. I don't know how well you can see this. You can see it says Henry Clay, 1844 on the blade. So these were made. You can buy these. Again, show your support in a very personal way for your candidate. We talked about campaign ribbons. These are campaign ribbons. They were generally worn on the lapel. They are usually printed on silk or satin, often with an image of Henry Clay. This one shows Henry Clay on a flagpole with his flag, or a man flying Henry Clay's flag on the flagpole. And a lot of these were generated, this is for the Pennsylvania delegation to the Wig convention, Wig district convention. Those are for specific events or for specific groups in some cases. This one features a very important image, the coon. This became popular with William Henry Harrison, and Clay adopted it, or it became associated with Clay. So we have a number of these in the collection. These also were sold en masse. This is a reproduction of a advertisement from a newspaper. And you can see here, they're talking about having 20,000 of these things for sale at this store in New York City, at Waite's Engraving. So, you know, you could go to the store, they just have huge piles of these things that you could buy. So some do survive as a result. They're very fragile in many cases, being silk. Silk often shatters. They are often confused as bookmarks. I frequently have found them or heard people call and say, oh, I found this in a book. Well, they do look a lot like bookmarks and could be worked that way, I suppose. Tobacco was a very popular product. Henry Clay was a tobacco user, and so there were a number of tobacco items for supporting your candidate. Here's a Henry Clay snuff box from 1844. Put your snuff in the box. There's your candidate right there on the outside. This is a pipe. This would have had a reed stem. There's Henry Clay on the pipe. So that would have been another way to support your candidate. They also made cigar boxes. I don't have one of those yet. Someday, maybe. So here's a parade. This is a drawing somebody did of a parade in support of Henry Clay. You see all the people and the band, and they all have little signs which say different things like protection to domestic industry, wigs, no polk, and so on. It's an incredibly detailed drawing. And again, this was found in a book by someone. The Whig Party published materials that had all the facts about the party, like this Wig Almanac. This tells you about all the Whigs' platform and the things Whigs have done. It has a little biography of Henry Clay. So quite a fascinating document to read, again, in 1844. There is Henry Clay as the old coon. Like I say, an image that came from William Henry Harrison's era that he became associated with. I've always thought that was a fun image. We talked about music. This is called the Clay Minstrel. This is basically your Whig hymnal. It's got lots of songs, a little campaign bio. So this thing you could carry. Here's the Whig battle cry. They're often set to popular tunes, but you could carry that in your waistcoat or your jacket pocket. If you go to a Whig meeting, you've got your hymnal ready to go. You can sing your songs. This book is the first ever biography of Henry Clay, which was actually published for the 1832 campaign. This was done by a man named George Prentice. It is a biography designed to inform voters. I would not call it necessarily objective. I mean, it's designed to present the candidate in a certain way. George Prentice is an interesting individual. He came to Kentucky to do this, finished the biography, and was asked to take over a flagging newspaper in Louisville called The Journal. He published a journal for many, many years, and that eventually merged with Henry Watterson's Courier and is now our state's flagship newspaper. So The Journal was actually published first as a Henry Clay paper. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but an important association. There's actually a statue of him in Louisville. He became associated with a movement called the Know Nothing movement, which was an outgrowth or a shard of the old Whig Party when it broke up after Clay died. And the Know Nothings were American Party, were unfortunately staunchly anti-immigrant. That was a big part of their platform. They became known as the Know Nothings because if asked if they were a part of the party or knew about what it was doing, they would say, I know nothing. So that is an unfortunate reality of Mr. Prentice, that he was rather anti-immigrant. This is a bandana. This has got Henry Clay on it. You can see a lot of symbols. There's about the tariff, agriculture and commerce, union and country. We got the old coon down here rolling the ball forward, rolling on to clear the way, make way to the White House. This is really a neat piece. This has all of the symbols. It even has Harry of the West, which was another nickname for Henry Clay. Because he came from Kentucky, he is from the first state, one of the first states, the first state west of the coast. And so he's representing the first western part of the country. So he becomes Henry of the West. But this really is nice because it has so much symbolism on it that you can see. This is the New York Tribune. One didn't have to wonder about one's newspaper views at the time because newspapers were extremely open about who they supported. If you look here in the Tribune, there at the top is the candidates that they're supporting, the Whig candidates, Henry Clay and Frelinghuysen, Millard Fillmore, who went on to become president, was president when Clay died. Actually, he became president when Zachary Taylor died. And you can see the other candidates for state offices. And then if you go down here, there's all these articles about meetings of various Clay groups, etc. So there's no question at all about what political position this paper supports. And that was perfectly normal. Again, we got more over here, Whig meetings, lots of advertisements. This may be the paper I got, Clay and Frelinghuysen breast pins. This is where that the ad I showed you over there comes from. This is really a neat paper. And here's the old coon again. And here's a thing asking the Carmen of the city of New York to vote for Henry Clay. So just no question at all who the paper supported. The election was covered internationally. This is the Illustrated London News. You can see there's Polk and there's Clay. There's a Henry Clay campaign event on the front cover. So even in London, they learned about this. And they talk about the election that happened. This may, by this time, have included the result. This was November 23rd. There's a lot being said right now about the length of time it may take to count votes. That was the norm in this period of time. Votes were counted, and it usually took a couple of weeks for the result to become known because states took their time. Some states took longer than others, and of course, if a state was further away to the west, it might take a while for that information to make its way back east and be certified. So, often Clay sat on pins and needles for weeks, a couple of weeks waiting to know if he had won the election. This is a paper. It was just published especially for the campaign. It's called The Same Old Coon, That Same Old Coon. This was published in Dayton, Ohio. Henry Clay enjoyed good support in Dayton. This issue came out on his birthday. We own almost the entire run of this paper. I think we have all but maybe one or two issues. It started publishing with this issue, and it published all the way until right after the result of the campaign, and then it ceased to publish. This was designed to disseminate information to Whigs, supporters of Henry Clay, etc. Now, it's a fascinating document with all sorts of interesting campaign information. Talks about state elections. One of the weird things about elections in this period is that state elections for governor or state legislature or whatever often were on a different day earlier than the presidential election. That was an election unto itself. And so what would happen is a result would come in, say, for governor or a state legislature, and Clay would find out about that, and that would cause him to believe that he might be successful or unsuccessful in a particular state. So he's getting information all the way along as these other elections finish, and those are talked about in this newspaper. So kind of a neat idea. This is a really interesting engraving. We talk a lot about large gatherings and rallies and things. Well, this one was in Boston. Clay Club number 1 organized it. September 19th, 1844. You can see all the little people all carrying their signs, various state delegations. So these large gatherings were held. People came from all over to be part of them, to support their candidate and get out the vote. This is really a fascinating engraving to have one that thoroughly captured. We actually have a ribbon for the Boston Clay Club number 1 right there. You see it's got a date of July 4th, 1844, worn in a procession. So we know this one was actually used because it's got a note written on it that says so. And these pictures were given to Henry Clay by the young men of Boston in 1833. So several years before. So clearly he enjoyed great support in the city of Boston. This is maybe our most impressive campaign piece. This is a campaign banner. This banner was from 1844. It is printed on silk. You can see Henry Clay, the friend of his country, protector of home industry. Again, we're talking about home industry here. This would have been carried in parades and rallies. We had this conserved several years ago. And when we did, we discovered at the top, which you can't see except under certain kinds of light, that there was a box. And that box had the word Galena. Well, Galena is the name of a city in both Ohio and Illinois. So we aren't sure which Galena this actually went to, but we have some idea where it came from. This apparently, well, I think, ended up in the family at some point, but it is a campaign banner nonetheless, and many were made like this. Ours is pretty spectacular. So, are there any questions? We've talked a lot about elections and covered a lot of territory today, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that anyone may have. In closing, I do want to say, whatever you believe, whatever you choose to do, please, please, if you haven't already, wherever you are, and every state has different rules, and every state is doing things this year a little differently because of the pandemic, but please take the opportunity to vote. It's so important. It is your greatest opportunity to have your voice be heard, so please take that opportunity. Good morning, Dean. Good morning, Tracy. Thank you all for watching. The Coon meaning. William Henry Harrison was a candidate that was often associated with symbols representing sort of the frontier or the backwoods, the log cabin, the cider barrel, and I think the coon was similarly meant to symbolize his being of the people from the backwoods, not a big city guy, and they were trying to kind of say that Clay is in many ways the same as Harrison. So that's where the coon comes from, I think. There was actually an image of a coon on the door of a cabin for William Henry Harrison. If you're interested in learning more, we carry this book in the store, Henry Clay, The Man Who Would Be President by Jim Clotter. He's our state historian emeritus. It's a great accounting of Clay's political campaigns and explains all of the reasons why he did not become president, which is a very complicated question. So I highly recommend it. Really, really good book. This one is one I have that we don't actually have in the store, but if you're interested in campaigns in general, Hats in the Ring by Evan Cornog and Richard Whelan illustrates the history of presidential campaigns, and it starts with Washington and goes all the way through Bill Clinton. And it explains each election, shows all the candidates, the votes they got, and explains all of the issues and ideas that went into those elections. So it's a fascinating read and a really great way to study American electoral history. Well, if there are no further questions, thank you again for joining us. Again, don't forget to vote, and everybody, have a good day. Thank you very much.